I think the next speaker is a particularly talented individual. Movie star, good looks, charisma, a total legend. No, I'm in that strange, strange and unusual position of having to introduce myself. Thank you to Ina and Dag and the team for giving me an opportunity to speak to you. My area of work, when I'm not presenting these things, I work as a senior policy analyst for the Transform Drug Policy Foundation in the UK. We're an advocacy and policy analysis group with a fairly specific focus, not just on critiquing the war on drugs, but on kind of trying to flesh out a vision of what the world after the war on drugs, after prohibition would look like. So we've done a lot of work on detailed modeling of regulation of different drugs, not just of cannabis, but of different drugs. And we've been doing it for quite a long time. And I'm not going to be too precise, but I started doing this in a different century, just to put it in perspective. And when we did start, back in the last century, it was very much a sort of seen as an extreme position. It was quite radical. It was this wild flight of fancy. What do you mean you want to legalize drugs? People kind of get their head around legalizing cannabis, but other drugs, just craziness. But I think what I'd like to do today in the next 14 or so minutes is just give you a picture of what is happening in this part of the regulation debate. We've heard about decriminalization today. We've heard a lot about innovations in service provision and harm reduction. We've heard a bit about cannabis regulation, but I think it's important as we move forward with this, with the drug reform movement, to just try and remember that there are all kinds of reforms. I mean, you've heard from Jana in Czechia. There's all kinds of reforms that many people don't even know about. And I think there are lessons we can learn. There is inspiration we can take. I think the regulation piece of this jigsaw is just one part of the jigsaw. The harm reduction progress we've made since the 1980s and 90s and 2000s, the decriminalization reforms that have happened in the 2000s and onwards, I think regulation is part of the same spectrum of reforms. They all are moving away from the failings of a punitive paradigm and a war on drugs and pivoting towards policies that are rooted in public health, in science-based evidence, in human rights and in sustainable development. And as we make that journey, there are all these experiences bubbling up around the world that we can learn from. But it's good to at least know a little bit about them. Cannabis is probably the most obvious thing. When we started Transform back in 1998 or whenever it was, nowhere had legalized cannabis. There were the coffee shops in the Netherlands, but they were sort of half legalization and regulation. I've been doing it to, I think it was 2011 or 12 when Uruguay and Colorado and Washington State started legalizing cannabis. So we've been doing this for nearly 15 years before anyone legalized and regulated anything. It can get a bit dispiriting. But when that happened in 2011, it began a cascade of cannabis reforms all around the world. And you can sort of see, I think here that the green is medical cannabis, which is not really something that we're Transform do any work on, but it was on this map. The blue is non-medical, adult use, recreational, whatever you want to call it, cannabis. And you'll notice it's happening on every continent now. Uruguay in Latin America, South Africa in the African continent. There's also some interesting things happening in Ghana. Thailand's not even on this map. I mean, Thailand, it's a complete chaos, their legalization, but it is happening, and it's happening in Southeast Asia. Parts of Australia, not even marked on there. Some of the Caribbean, some of the Pacific Islands, some of the Caribbean islands, obviously almost all of North America. Almost the whole of North America now is effectively a legal cannabis jurisdiction. You can walk from the Arctic Circle almost to the equator without leaving a legal cannabis jurisdiction. You'd need a huge joint for that. But it is technically possible. It is technically possible, and then perhaps more relevant for us, this wave of reform that's happening in Europe, and we've heard from Czechia, but also Germany and Luxembourg and Malta. And Switzerland and the Netherlands. The Netherlands is actually moving from their kind of weird half legalization towards more legit legalization, where the actual supply to the coffee shops is legally regulated as well as the sale. So things are happening with cannabis all over the world. 10 years ago, just before 2012, nowhere, there was 0 places had legally regulated cannabis. Today, more than 500 million people, more than 500 million people, live in legal cannabis jurisdictions. So things that nobody thought were even possible 12, 15 years ago are now unfolding on every continent. Things that were impossible are actually happening. And we're learning a lot from it. I was just in New York. This is a pretty cool photo. I took it. I just wanted to share that. I was just in New York last week, and I might talk about that in a minute. And there was this, the stuff in America it's extraordinary. I don't love it. I'm not a big fan of all this sort of American-style commercialization, branding, marketing stuff. I'm more of the kind of I'm more of the plain packaging school of thought. So this American stuff, Transform had nothing to do with any of this. We haven't acted as consultants in any of the US jurisdictions. Well, maybe a little bit in Colorado, but this was my first government job. Was working in my first government, not just shouting at governments, but actually working with them to draft legislation. Was in Uruguay. This is what Uruguayan legal cannabis looks like. This is Malta, where we also worked as consultants. This is their packaging from last year, and over here, this is the packaging for legal cannabis in Canada. Now we worked on all of those. So you can see the difference. This one looks like a supermarket sweetie counter, and this stuff looks a bit more like either tobacco or perhaps pharmaceutical style packaging. So I'm not going to pontificate on that specifically, but there is a range of policy and practice emerging all over the world, and we can learn from it. And if this stuff is a disaster, well, let's not do that. If this stuff works better, maybe let's do that. In Canada now, 5 years after legalization, 80% of the market comes from legal sources. 80% market capture. So that's actually the same as tobacco in the UK, because 20% of tobacco in the UK is either smuggled or counterfeit. So they have successfully reduced the scale of the illegal market, which was in cannabis in Canada was controlled by a lot of really nasty organized crime groups, often involved in horrible violence. 80% of the market has gone. 5 years. So if you needed proof, now not everywhere has been so successful. It's been a right old cock up in California, for example, only about 30% of the market since 2018. So again, we can learn from all this. It's a sort of laboratory of change. It's fascinating, but it's happening. And when Norway gets to the point where they are deciding to map out what their legal cannabis market will look like, and that debate is happening now in Norway, and as it's happening in many countries, we can look at all these things and we can learn from it. And this is good. We're getting data, good and bad data. This is a cannabis social club in Barcelona, in Spain. There is 1,000 of these in Spain. I mean, they don't all look exactly like that, but there are more than 1,000 cannabis social clubs in Spain, and these operate on a non-profit basis. They are associations of people who come together within a non-profit cooperative, and the cooperative grows cannabis and supplies it to the clubs. Now, this is happening on a kind of informal decriminalization basis, but this model has since informed what's happened in Malta and in Germany, where these same non-profit associations are being formally regulated within the law. And part of the idea where they've gone for that, it's a shame they didn't do it. They tried, Jana tried in Czech Republic, but didn't succeed. Part of the reason they're doing that is because, well, one, you avoid the problems of over-commercialization and corporate capture. This stuff, which I'm not such a fan of, but also it's kind of allowable within EU law, maybe. they're still kind of working it through, but it seems like because it's a kind of collective decriminalization and it's not a formally regulated commercial retail market, it may be allowable within EU law. I wouldn't want to be too specific about it, but these countries, Malta and Germany, have got away with it so far, and they seem to have got away with it with regards to UN treaties as well. So this is something that we might be able to do even within the various multilateral constraints of EU law. Are you bound by EU law? Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. Certainly, you are certainly bound by UN law. What about other drugs? It's not just cannabis. This is in Colorado. This guy looks like a proper mushroom dude. This was at the MAPS conference, the Psychedelic Science Conference, and there was a bunch of stalls. They're just selling mushrooms. You can nominally it's only for therapeutic use, but you can buy the kits and the spores, and you can buy kits with the spores pre-made. I mean, you're not supposed to be able to buy this with the mushrooms already grown, but you can buy it, spray some water on it, put it on your windowsill for 6 weeks. There's a ton of mushrooms. So you can they are effectively legal for sale for therapeutic and non-therapeutic use as well. And this is happening in other states as well. Oregon also has a psilocybin psychedelics law. Mushrooms were never criminalized in Jamaica. There are interesting things happening in psychedelics, including medical psychedelics. That's less of my focus of this particular talk, all over the place. Kratom world. This is in the Czech Republic. I don't need to go into any detail about that because Jana's already talked about it. But there's amazing things happening in the Czech Republic where they are devising bespoke new regulation for drugs other than cannabis. Yeah, this is not how it's going to be, but this is what's there now. But also kratom, because it's not covered by the UN treaties and it's not banned under federal legislation in the US, there's kratom stores all over the states selling kind of kratom stuff. It's not very well regulated, and it's not as well regulated as it should be, but this stuff is opening up, and it's a challenge for us. We need to regulate these drugs properly, and in some cases, like here, they're not being. But we do have good examples of best practice about how they can be, and Jana's just talked about this. This is coca. These are coca leaf that contains the cocaine alkaloid in its more traditional form. So there's coca leaf tea, coca leaf drinks, coca chocolate, coca mambe powder that's sort of pre-mixed. There's even coca rum here. Don't think that's necessarily a particularly great idea. But and there's coca beer, which is so these are beer and rum kind of with cocaine in it. And these things are widely and nominally legally for sale in Bolivia and Colombia and Peru and bits of Argentina and elsewhere in the Andean region. So there's really interesting things happening in that arena. Coca leaf is actually fully legal in Bolivia. It's the only country, but they withdrew from the UN Convention and reacceded to the UN Convention with a reservation on coca leaf, so it's actually fully legal there. Everywhere else, it's a bit more in a grey zone. But there is also not just coca leaf, but there is also this interesting debate beginning to open up around the legalization regulation of cocaine. Over here, you can see one of the informal safe supply cocaine models that began in British Columbia. So this was not legal, but this was the peer groups buying cocaine and other drugs, methamphetamine and heroin, testing it themselves. And if it was pure, they would sell it or give it to people using drugs in these marginalized communities of many dependent users in British Columbia. So interesting models of safe supply. This was a speculative packaging for legal cocaine in a book that Transform produced. There was a link to it, but you can go to all our books are free online, by the way. We've written books about regulating cannabis and psychedelics and stimulants, and you can just go and download them on our website. And there's some copies here as well if anyone's interested. And over here you can see legal cocaine for medical use. So this is used as an anesthetic and vasoconstrictor. In medical use, the UK, for some reason, is the biggest user of medical cocaine. But there is, interestingly, and it's not something that Lars touched on, but there is some interest and some pilot studies opening up about substitution prescribing of cocaine to people who are dependent on cocaine. Now, obviously, that doesn't work in the same way as heroin because cocaine is much shorter acting. But they're even looking at, and Mainline, who Victor was talking about with the chemsex stuff, Mainline are trying to develop a model for substitution prescribing of smokable cocaine. So people are looking at some of these models. So across the spectrum with cocaine-based drugs, whether it's coca leaf, whether it's cocaine powder for recreational use, or whether it's crack, people are looking at different models of legally regulating availability. There's also a pilot being pushed forward in Bern in Switzerland for a pilot model of legal cocaine availability. The mayor of Amsterdam is also trying to promote something similar. And in Colombia, very much on the front line, obviously, of the war on drugs, specifically the war on cocaine, there was a bill that Transform, my organization, were involved in the design and drafting of, that was tabled in the Senate by a group of senators. That was to regulate coca production, harm reduction for people who smoke crack, but also a pilot study for the legal supply of cocaine for adult recreational users. And this was the first time, I think, anything around the legal regulation of cocaine had ever been put forward in a national parliament, and it was a particularly significant one because it was Colombia. Now, one of the senators, unfortunately that bill fell because an election was called, but one of the senators who was involved in it, who was part of the team that we were working with, was a guy called Gustavo Petro, who then won the election and became president of Colombia. So he is on the record as part of this bill, voted for the bill, spoke in favor of it, supports cocaine regulation. One of the first things he did was go and stand up at the General Assembly, and he did it again 2 days ago, and condemn the war on drugs and call for regulation of all drugs. So, this is not when we started 25 years ago, that would be beyond our wildest dreams. This is not a marginal thing. We have heads of state standing up at the UN. We have bills in major parliaments. We have reforms taking place all across the world, not just for cannabis, but for other drugs as well, including cocaine. And we have safer supply models emerging in Canada for stuff that Lars was touching on, for prescription of benzodiazepines within a medical model, prescriptions of amphetamines within a medical model, and more besides. So there's across the spectrum of drugs and of risk behaviors associated with those drugs, progress is being made in multiple jurisdictions all across the world. This is a particularly significant moment. This dude here is Volker Turk. He is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And this is what he had to say. The evidence is clear. The so-called war on drugs has failed completely and utterly. I think we can all agree with that. Decriminalization is another crucial step towards a more humane and effective drug policy. Good on you, Norway. Accompanied by support for social reintegration. We need to start treating the person and not punishing the drug use disorder. At the same time, this is the bit, important bit. At the same time, responsible regulation should aim to take control of illegal drug markets and eliminate profits and illegal trafficking, criminality, and violence. So this is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the lead voice for human rights at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which is the lead UN agency for human rights, unambiguously calling for the legal regulation of all drugs. And if there was any question, this was a report that he produced. It was requested by the Human Rights Council in Geneva. They produced this incredible report, and I really do recommend everybody read it. If you could see it, it seems to have disappeared. Oh, I can see it here. Luckily for you, I can still read it. Oh no, anyway. So this, I appreciate this is quite a boring slide, and you can't see it anyway. But yay! The 68th paragraph, it's on about page 12. The rest of the report, by the way, is a forensic deconstruction of the war on drugs through a human rights lens. It's a brutal takedown of all of the horrible human rights abuses that are taking place across the world, whether it's the death penalty, corporal punishment, denial of access to medicines, mass incarceration, discriminatory policing, all of that horrible shit. It describes it all in forensic detail. But in the recommendations bit, crucially at the end, it says this: as prescribed by the International Guidelines on Human Rights and Drug Policy, which I also recommend you to read, it's an amazing document. The following are key recommendations for states and relevant stakeholders to develop effective drug policies grounded in human rights. So they are recommending that states do this. Adopt alternatives to criminalization, zero tolerance and elimination of drugs by considering decriminalization of usage, and take control of illegal drug markets through responsible regulation to eliminate profits from illegal trafficking, criminality and violence. In the case of decriminalization, review convictions, sentences, so expungement of convictions, and C, just in case you missed it the first time, consider developing a regulatory system for legal regulation and access to all controlled drugs. So again, this is a recommendation from the lead UN body to legally regulate all drugs. So this is no longer a fringe thing. This is a major, high-level UN institutional endorsement, and it begs some very important questions within the UN, because you have now a fight happening between the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, which is effectively maintaining the prohibitionist status quo globally and maintaining the global prohibitionist regime under the UN treaties, and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, who are saying, no, we need transformational change. We need to legalize and regulate all drugs. The war on drugs has failed totally and utterly. It's not something that the UN, it's undermining all the UN Charter and all the goals of the UN. We shouldn't possibly be endorsing it. Just very quickly, it's not just high-level UN organizations. This is Amnesty International, the biggest NGO in the world with 2 million members all around the world. Chapters in every country. They produced a brilliant drug policy document last year. That, again, please do read it. I'm amazed it got so little profile. But again, it's very like the Office of the High Commissioner's report. It's a forensic human rights deconstruction of all the failings of the war on drugs, and it makes a whole series of very pragmatic recommendations, including regain control and reduce violence by moving towards the effective regulation of drugs, all drugs that is, based on scientific and evidence-based assessment of the risks and harms of each drug, to effectively control substances and provide legal channels for those permitted to access them. So this is, one of the biggest, high-profile, most well-known mega NGOs in the world, clearly, unambiguously calling for the legal regulation of all drugs. So this is not a marginal position anymore. It has major, high-level institutional endorsement. So just to finish up, what does all this mean? I think we are in dark times. The Trump era, the rise of sort of fascism and anti-immigration populism, it's dark, it's difficult, it's an existential challenge for many of us, and we have sleepless nights, but we will defeat it by building solidarity and allyship between movements. So the drug law reform movement and the environmental movement and the anti-racist movement and the development movement and all these different, and the LGBT movement, we all need to stand together and push back against these sort of forces of darkness and sort of creeping authoritarianism and oppression. You are all activists. You are all torchbearers for the drug law reform movement. So use the power you have. All of those changes I've talked about, whether it's in harm reduction, whether it's in decriminalization, whether it's the cannabis reforms, they have all been driven by a bottom-up process, local actions, NGOs, local government, NGOs have taken on, and local forces have taken. It's never come from government. It's never come from the UN. It's always been a bottom-up process. You are the engines of change. Use that power you have. Every argument we've had in this arena, we have won. Sometimes it's taken years. Sometimes it's taken fucking decades. But we always win because we are ultimately right. We're on the side of human rights, public health, sustainable development, social justice, science and evidence. We will win those arguments. So do not lose heart. It just may take a while. Support the wider drug law policy and law reform movement, all impacted, all communities. It's not just don't have a parochial view. Legal cocaine, legal cannabis, whatever it is in Norway, it impacts the entire supply chain, all the way to the jungles of the Amazon. The west coast of Africa, countries like Guinea-Bissau, transit countries for cocaine coming to Norway and coming to Europe, are being torn apart by the fallout from the war on drugs. So what we do here in Norway, in Europe, in the global north consumer countries has impacts across the world. And it's really, really important that we don't forget that. And we need to have solidarity with people, impacted communities across the entire supply chain. It's not just about use, it's about production, supply, and the carnage that the war on drugs causes in that context as well. The debate is not if, but how. We can't just go, yeah, legalize drugs, we have to do it right. We have to do it right. And drugs can be legalized well, or they can be done badly. We have to make sure that we have the right people around the table having that discussion, that we do it in the right way. I've said that already. You are all activists. I'll say it again. You are all activists, and you are the torchbearers of the movement. So don't drop that torch. Keep going. We are winning. I've been doing this for a hell of a long time, and I wouldn't still be doing it if I didn't think that we were making progress and I didn't think that we could win, because every time we've tried it, we have won. You're part of that movement. Let's just keep going, because we are making a lot of progress, and I think the speakers that we've heard from today really captured that. So thank you very much.